Thank you. It's hard to follow that outfit, Mark. It's absolutely magnificent. So thank you for the kind introduction. And thank you, everyone, for allowing me the opportunity to speak to you today. As Mark said, I'm going to try and cover the history of copyright law in precisely 28 minutes. And what I want to talk to you about is whether it's fit for purpose. We are hearing a lot about copyright law. I never thought that I would be considered newsworthy or cool as a copyright lawyer. Back in the day, if you're a copyright lawyer, you were basically stuck in the corner doing very technical law. Nobody was really interested. But if you look at the headlines, what's happening in the world, it's becoming of more and more importance. And the question on everyone's lips, what I always hear is it fit for purpose? Is there something broken with it? Does it need to change? You saw Elon Musk tweeting delete, copyright delete, and he deleted that. So why do we think that? Is it right, or is it just a pattern of history? Are we just seeing what's happened for many centuries in the world of human creativity and economic value and thought, how people celebrate things together? I would say it's a deeper cultural thing that's happening, but the law has always struggled to keep pace with innovation. So here's what I'm going to cover very quickly. We're going to start right at the very beginning of copyright. Why do we even have it? What's the point of it? We'll skip forward to the world of radio, television. How did that change the world? How did culture react to it? How did lawmakers think about radio and television? Digital came. For those of us who are old enough to remember the shift to digital, incredibly powerful thing happened because all of a sudden you could copy things instantaneously in perfect quality. And at the time that was incredibly revolutionary and incredibly disruptive and legally problematic. I would argue the internet is still today the greatest disruptor the world has ever seen when it comes to copyright and creativity. It's dramatically shifted everything, created enormous threats and enormous opportunities for a lot of people. And then we're going to come to the thing that everyone's talking about today, AI, and is that really such a problem for copyright law? So, let's go back in time to printing. When did humans start to recognize the value of creativity? How did we think about valuing people's thoughts, people's ideas? Well, in 1040 is probably where it started in China, and Bisheng invented the movable printing apparatus using ceramic or wooden blocks. You then saw in 12th century China that changed to bronze metal. So we were printing as humans for a very long time, but it wasn't until the 1500s and the Gutenberg press that things really changed. And why was that such a change? Well, you could print 3,000 pages a day, and at the time that was an enormous amount of material that could be reproduced. And what was being printed? The Bible. So you had this incredible revolution that people were first exposed to the Bible through the Gutenberg printing press. And that spread really quickly in the 15th century. You saw an explosion of printing activity around Europe. And all of a sudden, people were being educated, ideas were being shared, religion was being perpetuated. You saw a lot of things happening. Still, by the way, at this point, no copyright law. So this is a map of Great Britain at the time. These are the regions that were controlled by the printers. So each printer was afforded a region. This is the first territorial copyright licensing. You had printers who were afforded the ability to print in a particular part of the country, and that was the only area to which they could distribute. So, who benefited from this? So, UK really started when it comes to copyright law. Richard III said, okay, printing is fine. By the way, I'm going to tell you what you can and can't print. I'm going to tell you the ideas that you can and cannot disseminate. And I'm going to pass a law which is going to ban any foreign books. And I'm going to control the price. And I'm going to control what you see as a population. And he formed the Stationers' Company. It still exists today. I actually spoke at the Stationers' Company about 10 years ago. about the internet, so it still exists in central London. But they had a monopoly on printing and really had the first anti-piracy laws. They could control and stop other people printing stuff. Now that was a problem. Think about this today. This is still happening in the 1500s. People didn't like being told that they couldn't copy something, they couldn't use something. They didn't like the censorship. And there was protests in the streets, big riots about this. And people were complaining and saying, hey, look, if I've got an idea, it deserves some form of protection. So the Statute of Queen Anne is the first copyright law, and it really gave rights to authors. It said if you've written something, you have the exclusive right to exploit it for a period, and nobody else can do that. And it's a really short term, if you think about it, 14 years. I think life expectancy was very different then. But yeah, a very short period. And Henry VIII had a quote. It's very rare in my career that I can pull up a Henry VIII quote. But he was talking about these sinister and contentious ideas and the naughty books that were being distributed in England. So when you have copyright, you also have, what do these two people have in common? Mary Read, first female pirate, I'm told. Some people might say that Vanilla Ice may have been a pirate. Queen and David Bowie did not like what he was doing. But you have piracy. So you've got copyright, then you have piracy. And you have control. So what happened next? Well, printing became international. Went from being a UK phenomenon, and you had advances like steam-powered, it seems crazy now, steam-powered presses, mechanical typesetting. Population growth, people began to come in cities and they wanted to know things. There was a thirst for knowledge. Trains were invented. When trains were invented, people wanted to read stuff. So you had this explosion. Publishing went from being something that disseminated ideas to being an industry all of itself. And throughout different parts of Europe, you had people creating stories, people being interested. It spread to the US. Publishing was centered in Philadelphia, Boston, New York City. And there was piracy. So Charles Dickens, if you look at the history of the times, Charles Dickens complained vigorously that his works were being copied in America and he wasn't being paid. So even in this time of history, we have piracy. So this here is a map of where the printing was happening all around the world. So you've got this idea that you went from having locally concentrated publishing to now it became international. Now, it's very hard to get one book, one, I guess, typeset from one country to another, but there was definitely things happening in the late 19th century around the world, so we needed a solution. So what did we get? Well, we got the Berne Convention. If you're a copyright lawyer, the Berne Convention is absolutely the bedrock of just about everything we think about when we think about protecting works. And I still think it's an enormous achievement of its time to get every country in the world pretty much to agree that an idea or a creator's idea had a uniform protection. So if I'm an author in Denmark, my work has the same level of copyright protection in the US or in Singapore or wherever it is in the world. You have this kind of uniform protection. That's an enormous legal undertaking. You wouldn't easily manage to achieve that today. And that still sits with us today. It's the bedrock of copyright law. The US took a long time to join. I'll explain why in a minute. There was a big revision in the 70s. Russia joined in 73. But even today, the Berne Convention is important. And what do we all agree under the Berne Convention? Well, equal protection. If you're a foreign author or a domestic author, you have equal protection. There's no registration or formalities needed. We'll talk about perhaps why in some countries people do register their copyrights, particularly in the US. You've got independent protection in each country, and it was agnostic. That was the really revolutionary thing. It didn't really think about different types. It didn't say books are protected and other things are not protected. Everything's protected regardless of format. So that's printing. We now get to the 1900s and we see the advent of radio, and television. So what happened? Well, I would say radio was the first electronic mass medium. You had urbanization, and then radio was a way that you could see one-to-many communication. Used a lot during wartime, used for propaganda, morale, unity, but it also, at the same time, you had serialized dramas. You had stuff that was more creative, entertainment, variety shows, live music. If you hear the phrase fireside chat, that derives from this era. Roosevelt would have his fireside chats with people and tell the nation what was happening. Shared national cultural experiences, and then we know that television came. So this is lean back, one-to-many communication. TV rapidly spread post-Second World War, and it was a luxury product. And it combined, I mean, it was absolutely revolutionary, combined audio and video at the same time. So, of this era, we have Walt Disney. Why do we as copyright lawyers care about Walt Disney? Probably two things. Number one, incredibly revolutionary use of technology. So Disney, back in the day, was pioneering things that were just like a spaceship to most people. We had Technicolor. You know, many of you will think about Technicolor. You had, I think he was the first to synchronize audio with animation. So Steamboat Willie, which is the Mickey Mouse, very first Mickey Mouse show, was a real pioneering thing. And he also lobbied very heavily for copyright changes. His argument was, look, I've invested really, really heavily in creating these fantastic stories. They deserve more protection. It wasn't until Bill Clinton passed the Copyright Term Extension Act in the late 80s, early 90s that that change was made. But Disney was a massive pioneer at this time. And I would say American copyright law really struggled to keep up, and we're going to come on to the geopolitics of copyright, but struggled to keep up. It wasn't moving as quickly as some of the other laws. So here's an example. Film, pretty much invented late 1890s, 1900, didn't get protection for about 20 years, more or less. So there was chaos in those 20 years. If you produced a film, your investment may not have been protected. Other people could copy it. Record labels sometimes get criticized in the music industry for being overly protective. I would argue they had 100 years where sound recordings didn't even attract a copyright. They were seen as derivative. They were seen as a not as important copyright as a musical composition. And then you have radio, and although the laws changed, they changed relatively quickly, but the big chaos was the spectrum. People were broadcasting, there was no real coordination, no real laws controlling how you could broadcast to people. You've all heard of pirate radio, of course. So the law, the point I'm making here is the technology developed and the law struggled to keep up, particularly in the US. Now, what about Asia? We're here in Singapore. How did Asia think about copyright? So I think the more traditional view in certain countries in Asia was that, you know, creativity was seen as communal. You know, a village would have a song. It wasn't necessarily created and attributed to an individual, but that changed in the late 19th, early 20th century. Japan joined the Berne Convention early compared to many other countries in Asia. You then saw India, Southeast Asia, you saw other places begin to adopt those laws. But it wasn't really until the 80s that you saw a big shift because there was big piracy and a lot of international pressure for stiffer copyright laws in this part of the world. And that happened. China passed probably its most important copyright law in the 90s. India now, I would argue India, South Korea, Singapore, Taiwan have some of the most sophisticated copyright laws in the world. So not only has this part of the world caught up, but it's in many ways overtaken other parts of the globe. Okay, so we've had one-to-many. We've had radio, we've had television. We've seen that struggled to keep up. Here was the next disruptive thing. I'm sure as I look around, some of you in this room remember recording from the radio. So you would press the tape and you'd listen to the radio show and okay, now I can record the song because I can't really get it any other way. I could buy a record, but it's really expensive. So tapes were enormously problematic, and the music industry decided, I'm just going to skip forward a couple of slides here. So the music industry said, well, this is killing music. There was a big campaign, this idea of taping stuff, making an illegal copy, killed music. And this, I would argue this campaign pretty much failed. People didn't really believe that it was killing music. There was a legal gap. You could make a copy at home. And the industry was unsuccessful in stopping people making these copies, even though the technology permitted it. And there was a case brought against Sony for manufacturing the machinery that allowed people to make copies, and that case failed. So another important point in copyright law where the law said, look, the technology is the technology. The fact that it enables the stuff shouldn't stop cultural development, rebellion, if you like, and the law just lagged behind. So what was the other? I'm just going to go back a little bit here, or maybe I can't. Yeah, here we go. So here's the other development. So as if tapes weren't disruptive enough, we had digital. So I remember getting rid of my vinyl collection. I didn't get rid of all of it, thank goodness, but I thought, oh wow, I'm going to have to replace it with CDs. A golden age for the music industry and the movie industry. It had a new format. Everybody loved it. It was way better. Better quality, cheaper, easier to produce. Profit margins went through the roof. But also, you could copy very, very easily. So you didn't have to wait a long time. You didn't have to press a tape and run a tape to tape. You could just copy almost instantaneously. So that became problematic for the industry also. So you had loads of money coming in. You've got this great new format. But at the back of their minds, oh, you can copy really easily. Thank goodness you can't distribute really easily, because you can get your Walkman and you can listen to your music and load it up, but you can't copy very easily. Sorry, you can copy easily. You can't distribute very easily. So what happened next? Well, we had the internet. And the internet, for sure, in my view at least, was the most disruptive. So before, you had a global network of interconnected wires that enabled distribution at no cost. Media was tied to physical. You had to ship the CDs. You had things called breakage. You had distribution issues. It wasn't instantaneous. It took a long time. The internet changed that, broke geographic barriers. Content traveled instantly worldwide. You had YouTube come up. I remember when YouTube came out, I was like, wow, you can create a video and post it on the internet. That doesn't feel right. I can just instantly, a whole world can see what I'm creating. So it was an enormous revolution. It drove new business models. So Netflix was a business that shipped DVDs. Blockbuster was also a business that allowed rental of DVDs. It's a very famous story about one, dramatically dying quickly and one surviving and thriving and adopting the internet through over-the-top television. Spotify, as we all know, allowed this immediate distribution of music, and it changed. And while this was happening, of course, you had Napster, you had massive piracy problems at the same time. But the big changes, immediately distribution went to be global, to be very quick, and media was more accessible, diverse, and dynamic. It shouldn't be a video, but it is. I'm amazed it survived. Okay, so what did the law do? Well, the law did think about, copyright law did think about the internet. It did permit copying and streaming to take place as part of operating the internet. So if you were an ISP, you were exonerated from any copyright issues. YouTube famously relied on this and said, well, I'm just a place where people post stuff. The law gives me protection. I'm just operating part of the internet. That's absolutely fine. Another thing that happened during this period is DRM. I don't know, many of you in this room will remember DRM, but if you downloaded something, you were permitted a number of burns on a CD. So I remember arguing with record labels and publishers about the number of burns that were permitted if you downloaded something. I mean, it seems so antiquated today, but the law didn't quite get that right either. So you got some legal threats saying, look, you're silencing free speech. It's a problem. It doesn't let me do things that copyright would permit me to do. So we've got disruption. We've had enormous disruption with the internet. Now you've got memes. Are memes the next disruptor? Why are they a problem? So they reuse popular images. They definitely use copyright works, often with inside jokes, ironic twists. They allow anyone to be creative. No gatekeepers for memes. They're quick, they come and they go. You've got some famous memes. Some could be very repetitive. They're impactful. Donald Trump, for sure, been the victim of many memes. Drake's team, when they're thinking about music videos, they're thinking about how he will be memed. So people think about I don't know whether there's a word for that, memification. I never want to say that word again, but memification. So they reshaped creativity and transformed, made the act of creating much more participatory and changed traditional concepts of ownership. So again, if you're a lawmaker, how are you dealing with memes? This is not easy. So the law did try and keep up. You've got some laws in the UK that allow you to make a meme in a particular set of facts, right? It's got to be recognizably and noticeably different. It's got to be funny. That's a high bar for some people. And it can't harm the original market's commercial use. So it narrowly permitted memes. There's still a bit of gaps, but again, disruption, massive disruption, and the law managed to keep up. Anyone know the name of this monkey? Why do I even care about the monkey? So the monkey is called Naruto. I don't know whether that was his real name, whether his parents gave him the name Naruto, but that's what he became known as. And he took a picture. So you've got a wildlife photographer who's out in the jungle taking pictures of monkeys, and the monkey stole his camera and took pictures. And the picture on the right there is a very famous picture, and it was widely circulated around the internet, and everyone thought, brilliant picture of a monkey. Problem was, the photographer didn't like the fact that this picture, after he'd invested all the time going out to the jungle, spending days in the cold and wet, waiting for the monkeys to appear, getting like the absolute money shot, the best picture he could ever get, and now it's being circulated all around the internet. So he sued anyone that was infringing what he saw as his rights. The problem was this: the law doesn't provide that anyone other than a human can be an author. So the case was decided against him, and the courts in the US said, no, you have to be a human to be able to create and attract copyright law. Copyright law is designed for humans. It protects, and then we go right back to the printing press, right back to the very early days of thinking about how we disseminate information around the world. Could it be right that a monkey could own a copyright? And the court very clearly said absolutely not. So why do we care about that when we think about AI? So AI is today's disruptor, right? I would argue that certainly AI does some things that a traditional copyright owner may not like. It does make copies in the course of the machine learning about how to create new content. But copyright law only really recognizes human authorship. The machines cannot own rights. You can't register a work with the US Copyright Office if it's been created by a machine. So lots and lots and lots of work here for copyright lawyers. Happy days. In our firm, Reed Smith, we decided as a business matter that we were not going to get involved in the litigation, whether acting for creators, because we represent some of the world's most famous creators, or representing platforms, because we represent some of the world's most successful content platforms. So we stayed out of it. But lots of other lucky law firms did not. And there's an enormous number of cases going on in the world trying to decide how AI is regulated, how copyright law should deal with it. And the problem here is that the lawmakers, the governments, haven't quite figured out how to deal with AI. And so while they're busy figuring it out, people are arguing, and arguing a lot because they've got very strong opinions. They think it's severely damaging their business model, and they're bringing claims. And some of those claims are being won, some are being lost. But in the absence of statutory answers, people will go to the courts. And there's some really challenging questions there. I think they're hard, right? Should it be fair use? What's the geopolitical impact of saying it isn't? Are the outputs themselves derivative works? I think it's quite obvious if they're regurgitating, but if they're just showing something that's similar, is that derivative? Do developers of AI products have to obtain licenses? The last one, I think, is the hardest, data privacy. I'm not even going to touch that, but that is incredibly hard. So that's what we're wrestling with today. So what does that mean for us? Here's the punchline, I guess. Are we ready for the AI era? Now that machines can create music and art without humans, are we keeping up? I would argue we are. Certainly because copyright law thinks about these things already. There are answers. We've just not had the decisions we need. Some of the governments haven't quite come to a conclusion because it's a tricky, tricky issue. But I believe that copyright law does encourage innovation. It does eventually catch up. History tells us it's going to catch up. And for that reason, I'm confident that it is sufficiently intelligent. However, I think it's intelligent now sufficiently when you've got artificial narrow intelligence. At the moment, the AI can't really think or create like a human. It can't have its own ideas. If you speak to, I've spent a good deal of time in the last 3 to 4 years speaking to people who are intensely expert in AI, and they disagree enormously about when artificial general intelligence will be with us, but they all do agree that it will arrive. And when it arrives, the machines will be able to create like we can. I think then we're going to have a really interesting question. I mean, you might argue the world's going to end anyway at that point, and we've got much bigger problems, but, or maybe not. So I think as we look forward, I think the law is going to solve this current AI problem, but looking forward, we've got other things to think about. And I'm just going to finish off here with some of the things that we think about as copyright lawyers that are really relevant to today's creator economy. Is it fair to permit people to parody, remix some memes? People don't get paid for memes. Is that okay? Is it okay that deepfakes happen? I think we mostly agree absolutely not. And there's many technologies out there, but from a copyright perspective, deepfakes are very, very disruptive. What about misinformation? What about synthetic media? What about privacy? These are real societal issues. I know that we think about this in entertainment context, but more broadly, these are quite serious things that we have to deal with. And then finally, will AI redefine creativity and authorship? And I really, really hope not. I think human creativity is the most interesting thing. And I'll leave you with a thought. I was speaking to some investors, some people who buy music copyrights and spend millions and millions of dollars on buying creative assets. And I asked them, what do you think AI means for the value of music? And they said, we think it's going to accelerate the value of human-created works. We think because it's human, it's like the blue tick on social media. If it's human-created, it's going to have more, not less value. And I'm going to spark an enormous debate in this audience. I'm out of time, so we can't debate it right now. But if you want to talk about it later, come and see me. Thank you so much for your time.